"Your cooking is old-fashioned, it doesn't suit us. I'll order something better." Those words cut deeper than any knife. They fell from my daughter-in-law's lips like shards of glass, landing squarely on the table I had spent days preparing with trembling hands and hopeful heart. My son, my only son, sat beside her in silence, his eyes lowered, his mouth shut, as though defending me would cost him too much. In that moment, the food I had poured my love into lost all flavor. The table I had dreamed would bring us together became a stage of humiliation. But let me take you back to where it began. I am 72 now. My back stiffens when I stand too long, my fingers ache when I chop too finely, but the kitchen has always been the room where I still feel useful. For 3 days I had planned this dinner like a festival. Each dish carried a piece of memory. The braised pork my son used to steal bites of when he thought I wasn't looking, the soup that warmed his childhood winters, the steamed fish he once called the taste of home. I wanted this meal to be more than food. I wanted it to be a bridge. My son had grown distant since his marriage, our conversations trimmed down to short calls, his laughter rarer than before. I thought, perhaps, if I set the table as I used to, full, warm, heavy with tradition, he would remember the boy he once was and the home that raised him. So I ironed the tablecloth even though my hands shook. I polished the plates with golden rims, the ones my own mother gave me when I was a bride. I folded napkins into quiet lilies, placed chopsticks neatly in pairs. The house smelled of soy, ginger, and simmering bones. It smelled of memory itself. When I received his message, "We're on our way, Ma," my chest filled with a fragile joy. I dusted the photographs on the wall, the graduation picture, the crooked smile of a boy who once clung to my hand. I whispered to myself, tonight maybe the silence will end. Then the doorbell rang. My son entered first, taller, heavier, his face carrying both fatigue and something I couldn't quite read. Beside him came his wife, elegant, sharp perfume clinging to her like armor. She glanced toward the table, her lips curling as if she had already decided what to think. I welcomed them with a smile I hoped would hide my nervousness. The steam from the kitchen slipped into the hallway, carrying the scent of all my effort. For a moment I believed the evening would unfold gently. But then her voice sliced through that hope, dismissing everything I had prepared. And my son, oh my son, remained silent. I looked at the dishes, still steaming, still waiting. The lilies folded on the napkins seemed to bow their heads in shame. And as I stood there, swallowing the taste of my own tears, one thought pressed against my chest. If my love, cooked and served with all I had left, was not enough to keep them at this table, what, then, was I still holding on to? I woke early that morning, before the city stirred. The air was damp, clinging to the windows, and the silence of the house pressed against my ears. Yet inside me, there was a hum, a small current of excitement that made my old bones move faster than usual. Today would be different. Today, I told myself, my son and his wife would sit across from me, and we would share a meal that tasted of belonging. I tied the apron around my waist, the fabric thin from decades of use, and began with the rice. My mother always said that rice carried the soul of a meal. I washed it carefully, rubbing the grains between my palms, watching the water cloud and clear, until it finally ran pure. The sound of water splashing into the basin reminded me of mornings long ago, when little feet patted across the kitchen tiles and a boy's voice asked, "Ma, is it ready yet?" I smiled at the memory. He used to beg for a spoonful straight from the pot, his cheeks puffed with impatience. Those days returned to me with each stir of the spoon, each hiss of steam escaping into the cold morning. Next came the pork. I had chosen it carefully from the market, bargaining gently, touching each cut to make sure it was firm but not too lean. For 2 nights it had rested in the marinade, darkened by caramel, softened by fish sauce and garlic. When I lowered it into the pot, the air filled with a sweetness that clung to my clothes, a perfume more precious to me than anything sold in a bottle. I wanted every dish to whisper to him, "Remember this? Remember home?" The fish was laid gently on a plate, its eyes still bright, its skin brushed with ginger and scallions. I recalled the way he used to clap when I lifted the lid and the steam rushed out, declaring proudly to his father, "This is my favorite." Would he say that again tonight, I wondered? Or would his tastes, like his life, have drifted too far? For the soup, I simmered bones until the broth turned clear and rich, seasoned only with patience. I skimmed the top, listening to the soft bubbles rise and fall like a quiet heartbeat. The whole house seemed alive, breathing with the sense of the past. While the pots worked, I set the table. I ironed the white cloth twice, smoothing every wrinkle as if smoothing the creases of our relationship. I polished the golden-rimmed plates until my reflection stared back at me, an old woman with tired eyes but hope still flickering there. Napkins folded into lilies stood in each bowl, waiting to be touched, unfolded, used. I even lit a small candle in the center, not for romance but for warmth, for light, to soften the edges of the evening. Every detail mattered. I wanted my daughter-in-law to see not only food but effort, not only tradition but love. Maybe she would notice the care. Maybe she would soften. Maybe my son, sitting at this familiar table, would be reminded that his childhood was not just a memory but still alive, still waiting for him in this house. I kept imagining the moment, the door opening, his smile as he breathed in the familiar sense, his voice saying, "Ma, you remembered." Perhaps he would take my hand, the way he used to when he was small, and my heart would finally rest. But beneath the excitement, there was also fear. I had seen the distance in his eyes these past years, the way he let his wife speak first, the way he laughed less. What if this meal, heavy with memory, felt like a burden to him? What if my flavors no longer belonged to his world? I shook the thought away and straightened the chopsticks. Hope, I told myself, was the most important seasoning. Without it, food was only food. With it, a simple meal could turn into forgiveness. The hours passed in a rhythm of stirring, tasting, adjusting. The house grew warm, the windows misted over, and my old heart beat with an unfamiliar lightness. By the time I received his message, "We're on our way, Ma," the dishes were all ready, lined up like soldiers awaiting inspection. I checked the clock. It was late, but the kind of late that makes anticipation sweeter. I dusted the photographs on the wall one more time, touching the frame of his graduation picture. "Tonight," I whispered, "you'll see how much I remember. You'll feel how much I still love." I took off the apron, smoothed my dress, and dabbed powder on my cheeks. My reflection looked fragile, yes, but not defeated. A mother is never defeated as long as she still believes her love can mend what is broken. The doorbell rang. My heart leapt, and for a brief, shining moment, all my fears dissolved. I imagined laughter spilling into the hallway, the sound of shoes tapping across the floor, the warmth of family filling the empty corners of this house. I hurried toward the door, carrying with me all the hope that had seasoned every dish. The door creaked open, and there they were, my son and his wife, framed by the cold evening air. He looked weary, his tie loosened, his hair falling over his forehead in a way that reminded me of the boy who once hated combs. She, by contrast, stood poised, her perfume filling the hallway before her footsteps even touched the floor. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiles, each sound echoing in my chest like a warning bell. Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice bright. I reached for his coat, but he handed it quickly to his wife instead, as if the gesture of letting me help would inconvenience her. The warmth of the kitchen drifted toward them, carrying the scents of simmered broth, caramelized pork, and ginger. My son's eyes lifted slightly, and for a second, just a fleeting second, I thought I saw recognition, even hunger, flash across his face. But it was gone before I could breathe it in. His wife wrinkled her nose. "What's that smell?" she asked, fanning the air lightly with her manicured hand. "So strong." My heart stuttered. I forced a smile. "It's the pork, dear. Your husband used to love it. He'd sneak pieces before dinner when he was a boy." She tilted her head, lips pressing into a polite curve that wasn't quite a smile. "Ah, I see." I guided them into the dining room, where the table waited like a stage dressed for celebration. The golden rims of the plates glimmered in the candlelight, and the lilies folded into napkins looked ready to bloom. I wanted her to notice, to say something kind. Instead, her eyes slid across the table with the cold appraisal of someone browsing a shop window. Sit, I urged. My voice trembled with the effort of sounding casual. My son pulled out a chair for her before lowering himself into his own seat. He didn't glance at the food, didn't glance at me. I ladled the soup first, clear and golden, the steam rising gently. I placed the bowl in front of her with careful hands, praying she might take even one sip and find warmth in it. She leaned forward, sniffed delicately, then set the spoon down untouched. "It looks traditional," she said, her tone heavy with something unspoken. "Traditional," I repeated softly, forcing my lips to curve. "Yes, these are recipes passed down from my mother. They've been part of our family for generations." Her eyes flicked to my son, then back to me. But sometimes traditions feel heavy, don't they?" My son cleared his throat. His fingers drummed lightly on the table. He didn't defend me. He didn't disagree. He just stared at the spoon as if the shape of it were suddenly fascinating. The rice was next. I scooped it gently, each grain soft and glistening, and filled their bowls. "You always said my rice was the fluffiest," I reminded him, a laugh trembling at the edge of my voice. "Remember?" He gave me a tight smile, more a twitch than an expression. "Yes, Ma." But his wife didn't pick up her chopsticks. She tapped on her phone instead, the glow of the screen washing her face in blue light. "You know," she said suddenly, "I could order something lighter. Sushi, maybe. Or pasta. Something modern." My hand froze above the serving spoon. The steam from the pork curled between us, but I felt cold. "These are your husband's favorites," I whispered, though the words scraped my throat raw. She laughed lightly, almost kindly, as though speaking to a child. "Tastes change, Ma. People change. We don't need to cling to the past all the time." Her words clung to me like smoke, stinging my eyes. My gaze darted to my son. Surely he would speak now. Surely he would say, "No, this is home. This is my mother's food. This is love on the table." But he only adjusted his tie and said nothing. Silence settled over us, thick as fog. The candle flickered uncertainly, the flame bending low. The napkin lilies drooped in their bowls, shadows stretching long across the cloth. I heard the soup bubbling faintly in the kitchen, a distant reminder of all the hours I had poured into this night. I swallowed hard and forced my lips to part. "At least try a little," I said, my voice soft, pleading. She finally lifted her chopsticks, took a bite of rice, and chewed slowly. Her expression didn't change. She set the chopsticks down. "It's fine," she said flatly. "But honestly, it feels heavy, greasy, not really our taste." The words struck like a knife sliding between my ribs. I glanced at my son again, waiting for rescue. He sipped water instead. And there it was, the first crack in the evening I had built with such fragile hope. The meal I imagined would be our bridge was already starting to crumble into ruins. Her words still echoed in my ears. "Not really our taste." I tried to swallow, but my throat felt dry, as though the rice I had served had turned to dust inside me. I looked across the table, desperate for the one voice that had once been my anchor, my reason to rise each morning. My son sat there, silent, his gaze lowered to the table as though he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. "Do you remember," I whispered, my voice shaking despite my effort, "how you used to ask for a second bowl of this soup every winter night? You said it made you feel warm all the way to your toes." He nodded faintly, the corners of his lips tugging upward but without warmth. "I remember, Ma," he said softly. Then his eyes dropped again like shutters closing, and the silence thickened. My heart squeezed painfully. It wasn't her words that pierced me the most, it was his silence. Silence from a son who once cried for me when he scraped his knee, who once whispered secrets into my ear because he trusted no one else. Now, at this table, he had given his voice to her and left me voiceless. His wife glanced at him, smirking slightly as though she had won a battle. "See? Even he agrees tastes change," she said. She reached for her phone again. "I'll just order something light for us. Don't worry, Ma, it's no big deal." I wanted to scream that it was a big deal, the biggest deal of all. Every dish was more than food, it was a thread tying us back to who we were, to who he was. If she dismissed the food, she dismissed me. And his silence was an agreement. But instead of screaming, I folded my hands tightly in my lap. My knuckles whitened, my nails dug into my palms, and I forced a smile so brittle it could have cracked at the slightest touch. "If that's what you want," I said softly. The pork cooled in its dish. The steam from the soup weakened, curling like tired breath before vanishing. The candle's flame flickered low, threatened by every small draft. I searched his face again. Perhaps he would notice how my shoulders trembled, how my lips pressed tight to keep from quivering. Perhaps he would remember that behind every dish was not just time, but sacrifice years of selling earrings, skipping meals, working my hands raw so he could have books, clothes, a future. Would he see it now? Would he rise, finally, and say, "Enough. This is my mother's table, her food, her love. Respect it." But he did not. He reached for his glass of water, drank, and set it down carefully, as if the clink against the table might offend someone. I could almost hear the sound of something breaking inside me. The silence between us stretched like a canyon. I tried to bridge it with words, but none came. My throat ached. My eyes burned. My heart screamed, but my mouth stayed shut. I thought for a moment of when he was a child, sitting at this very table with his legs swinging, asking me to blow on his soup because it was too hot. Back then, his voice filled the room with chatter. Now his silence filled it with shame. His wife tapped her phone screen, the glow lighting her satisfied face. "It'll be here in 30 minutes, she announced. Much easier than forcing ourselves. Forcing themselves. As though eating what I had prepared with love was a burden too heavy to bear. I nodded, though my chest caved inward. "Of course," I said. My voice was steady only because it had gone numb. The rest of the meal passed in fragments, her chatter about restaurants and travel, his quiet grunts of agreement, my silence wrapping around me like a shroud. The food on the table grew colder, untouched. The lilies folded into napkins, drooped, defeated. When she excused herself to take a call in the hallway, I leaned forward, my trembling hand almost reaching across to him. "Son," I whispered, my voice cracking, "do you really not want any?" He looked at me, finally, just for a second. His eyes carried something I couldn't name. Shame, guilt, exhaustion. But the words that might have healed me never came. He shook his head slightly, then lowered his gaze again. And in that silence, louder than any shout, I heard everything, his choice, his distance, his betrayal. The doorbell rang again. The food she ordered had arrived. She hurried back in, smiling brightly as if nothing were wrong, unpacking glossy boxes and colorful dishes. She placed them on top of the tablecloth I had ironed with such care, pushing aside the plates I had prepared as though they were leftovers meant for the trash. My son helped her. He lifted one of the boxes, opened it, and set it in front of himself. He didn't look at me, and I sat there, staring at my cold dishes, at the table that was meant to heal but had instead carved me open. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything I had left. I pressed my lips together, swallowing back tears, and thought, if silence is his choice, then what voice do I have left? The plastic bags rustled like an insult. She placed them on the table as if she were laying out treasures, each glossy container gleaming with sauces that smelled of sesame, pepper, and something foreign. Bright sushi rolls wrapped in seaweed, boxes of fried chicken glistening with oil, noodles tangled with chili and lime. Their colors shouted over the muted tones of my dishes, mocking the hours I had poured into each flavor. "Here we go," she said cheerfully, as though she were saving us from some disaster. "Much better, isn't it? Fresh, modern light." My heart clenched. The candlelight that once bathed my pork and fish in gentle gold now bounced harshly off the plastic lids of food I had not cooked. My table, my sacred table, had been invaded. My son helped her unpack, moving my dishes aside with quiet hands. The pork was pushed toward the corner, the soup bowl nudged nearer to the edge. The rice sat forgotten, steam fading into the air like a sigh no one heard. I wanted to scream, "Stop! This table was mine. This meal was love, memory, history. You cannot replace it with strangers' food in boxes." But the scream remained locked inside me, trapped behind my clenched teeth. She placed chopsticks on the new boxes and smiled triumphantly. "Now this looks like dinner." I stared at her, but more than that, I stared at him, my son, the boy I raised on these flavors, the man who once said my food was his comfort. He took a piece of sushi, dipped it into soy sauce, and ate it without hesitation. His eyes did not meet mine. The bite went down my throat like ash. I remembered the nights I sold my only earrings to buy him books, how he hugged me then, promising that one day he'd repay me with a life where I would never feel lack. I remembered the afternoons when he returned from school hungry, and I fed him the very pork dish now cooling at the table's edge. I remembered his voice telling me, "Ma, no one cooks like you." And now here he was, chewing food made by strangers while mine sat untouched. She laughed at something on her phone, holding a sushi roll between her fingers like a prize. "See? Doesn't this feel better?" I looked at the fish, still sitting in its steamer, skin glistening with ginger and scallions. It looked as though it were waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to fulfill its purpose. But no one reached for it. The fish, like me, remained invisible. The humiliation pressed down heavier than any weight I had ever carried. I wanted to rise, to sweep away the plastic, to remind them of the history carved into these dishes. But my body betrayed me. My hands stayed still, folded tightly in my lap, trembling under the table. My lips curved into a faint, false smile because that was all I had left to protect my dignity. "You should try this, darling," she said, holding out a piece of chicken to my son. He took it. He bit. He nodded. And with that nod, something inside me cracked so loudly I was surprised they didn't hear it. The meal I had built with love became a battlefield where I stood unarmed. I took a sip of water to steady my breath. The glass shook in my hand, the rim clicking against my teeth. They didn't notice. They were busy with sauces, laughter, their new feast that erased me bite by bite. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second sounded like a hammer, pounding into my chest. I forced myself to speak, my voice quieter than the rustle of their plastic bags. Did you even taste what I made?" Silence. He froze mid-bite. She raised her brows, then shrugged. "Ma, it's not about effort. It's about taste. Times change. We can't keep eating like it's 50 years ago." The words landed like stones. My son looked at me then, just briefly. His eyes flickered with something guilt. Maybe, but he said nothing. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, adjusted his chair, and returned to eating. That silence, sharper than any blade, confirmed what her words had already carved. My love, poured into this table, was not enough. The candle sputtered once, then steadied, its flame stubborn but small. I sat in its glow, invisible, my dishes cooling into relics of a past no one cared to taste. And in that heavy air, a question rooted deep in my chest. If even food, the language I spoke best, could no longer reach my son, what hope did I have left to ever reach him again? I sat very still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, as the laughter from across the table rolled over me like waves that refused to carry me along. They shared glances, inside jokes, the rustle of plastic lids opening and closing. Their world seemed sealed, and I sat outside of it, a ghost at my own feast. The humiliation of my dishes being pushed aside stung deeply, but something sharper began to prick at me as I watched them. There was a current in their behavior, subtle, but strong enough for a mother's heart to sense. When she leaned toward him, her words slipped between bites. "Don't forget tomorrow." He stiffened for half a second, then nodded quickly, eyes darting to me and away again. I caught the flicker, the unease in his glance, like a boy caught with crumbs on his face. "What's tomorrow?" I asked gently, forcing my tone to sound casual. "Oh, nothing, Ma," he answered too fast, his chopsticks fumbling with a piece of sushi. "Just work. Work on a Sunday?" I pressed. He avoided my eyes, busying himself with dipping sauce. She smiled sweetly, far too sweetly. "Yes, dear mother. Big projects don't rest." Something in the way she said "dear mother" unsettled me. Her smile was polished, but her eyes gleamed with something harder, something victorious. I didn't push further. Years had taught me that silence could sometimes reveal more than questions. I sipped my water and let my eyes drift around the table. Their new dishes crowded out mine completely now. The pork sat abandoned, its glaze hardening. The soup had cooled, a thin film forming on its surface. The rice hardened in its bowl. I felt as though my very history was being suffocated beneath plastic containers. But beneath that suffocation, my mind began to turn. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up quickly, angling the screen away from me. For an instant, as she scrolled, I caught the reflection in her glass of water, a name flashing across the screen. Not work? Not business? A name I didn't recognize. Her lips tightened as she typed furiously. Then she laughed lightly as though nothing mattered. My son didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and chose not to see. I folded my hands tighter. My bones ached, but my silence felt necessary. There was something here, something more than her disdain for my cooking. "You've hardly eaten, Ma," my son said suddenly, his voice soft, almost guilty. I met his eyes. "I cooked for you," I replied simply. The words were quiet, but they carried all the weight in my chest. He lowered his gaze again. "I know." And then he said nothing more. She reached across, touching his wrist lightly, her nails sharp against his skin. "Don't worry," she said to him, not to me. "We'll make sure everything changes soon." Changes. The word clung to me, heavy, suspicious. What changes? I forced another smile, though inside me the unease grew like a shadow lengthening in the candlelight. I realized then that tonight's insult might only be the surface of something deeper, something I hadn't yet uncovered. I turned my attention back to the table. I watched them closely, not with anger now, but with the patience of someone who knows storms don't come without warning signs. Her laughter rang too loudly, as though rehearsed. His silence dragged too heavily, as though burdened by more than guilt about a meal. Their glances, quick, nervous, traveled between them with a code I couldn't yet decipher. The candle flickered, its flame bending low as if bowing under invisible weight. My dishes, untouched, seemed to mirror me, once full of purpose, now fading into silence. I said little more that night. My silence was not defeat, but armor. Words could betray me, but silence allowed me to listen. And listening, I began to hear what lay beneath their voices. It wasn't just about food. It wasn't just about taste. Something else was brewing beneath this roof, and my heart told me it would reach far beyond the humiliation of a single dinner. As I cleared a plate no one had touched, the question gnawed at me. What exactly were they planning, and why did my son look at me as though he had already chosen her side? The following weekend, I dressed carefully in my best blouse, the one with the embroidered collar that had survived decades of washings. My son had called. He said there would be a small celebration, just family, for his wife's promotion. He wanted me there. His voice on the phone was soft, almost dutiful, and though my heart ached from the dinner we had shared days earlier, I told myself this could be a chance to mend what was broken. When I arrived, the apartment already buzzed with voices. Her friends filled the living room, laughter spilling from their wine glasses, perfumes mixing into a haze that stung my nose. I stepped inside, clutching the small gift I had wrapped in brown paper, an embroidered scarf I had stitched with my own hands. It wasn't expensive, but it was mine to give. "Ma, you made it," my son said, coming to greet me. He kissed my cheek lightly, his lips barely touching. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands. His wife floated across the room, sleek in her new dress, her laughter sharp and triumphant. She embraced me, perfumed cheek brushing mine. "Mother, how wonderful of you to come," she said in a tone that was polished, distant. Her eyes flicked to the gift in my hand. "Oh, you brought something." "Yes," I murmured, handing it to her with both hands. "I made it myself." She peeled the paper away slowly, revealing the scarf. Her smile faltered for only a moment before returning, glossy and bright. "How thoughtful," she said, draping it over a chair as though it were a napkin. Then she turned quickly to show her friends the designer bag she had just received from her colleagues. Their applause drowned out my silence. I stood near the corner, watching, listening. I saw the way she leaned into him, whispering. I saw the way he nodded, eyes shadowed, avoiding mine. The dinner was served catered, of course. Platters of gleaming dishes lined the table. Imported cheeses, delicate canapes, seafood that smelled of foreign ports. Everyone clapped as though this abundance had sprung from her alone. My son raised his glass. "To my wife, for her success," he said. His voice rang with pride. He did not look at me. He did not remember the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes for him, the mornings I sold vegetables in the rain, the sacrifices that carved the path for his education, for this very life he now celebrated. I lifted my glass of water, though no one noticed. Then came the words that made my stomach twist. She tapped her glass, smiling at the crowd. "And soon, there will be more to celebrate. A bigger place, a proper home for us." Her eyes darted toward me as she said it, a glimmer in her gaze that tightened my chest. "A bigger place?" someone asked. "Yes," she said smoothly. "We've been looking. My husband's childhood house, Well, it's lovely, but it's time for a change, don't you think? Laughter rippled across the table. My breath caught. My house? I looked at my son. His lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't speak. His silence roared louder than any confession. The room blurred around me. Glasses clinked. Friends congratulated. Her hand rested lightly on his arm like a claim. The words repeated in my head: childhood house. Time for a change. I thought of the walls where his height was measured in pencil marks, the yard where he ran barefoot until his knees bled, the kitchen where every dish carried the weight of my love. And now, in front of strangers, she dismissed it all as something to be traded away. I set my glass down carefully, my fingers trembling. The scarf I had stitched with care lay forgotten on the chair, ignored. The celebration grew louder, but inside me, something cracked. The humiliation of the dinner days ago was only the beginning. This was deeper, sharper. They weren't just pushing aside my food now. They were pushing aside my life. I kept my face calm, my lips curved faintly, but my mind began to churn. If they were planning to take the house, then every smile, every silence, every dismissive word had been steps toward this. I glanced at my son one more time. His eyes flickered to mine, heavy with something: guilt, fear, but again he said nothing. And in that silence I heard the truth. The battle I feared had only just begun. A few weeks later I received another invitation, not through my son, but through a message from his wife. "We're celebrating my birthday. It would mean a lot if you joined." I read the words twice. They looked polite, but something about them felt rehearsed, calculated. Still, I told myself, maybe this is a chance. Maybe tonight will be different. Mothers cling to hope even when hope bruises their hands. I carried with me a small box wrapped in faded gold paper, a necklace I had worn in my youth, one of the few pieces I had never sold despite hard times. I wanted to give it to her as a gesture, a bridge. When I arrived, the apartment was buzzing again, music thrumming through the walls. Her friends filled every corner, glasses in hand, voices rising above the clink of cutlery. She stood in the center like a queen, wearing a red dress that caught every eye. My son hovered nearby, obedient, his smile fixed but thin. "Mother, you came," she said, her voice honeyed, carrying just enough warmth to pass as genuine. I pressed the gift into her hands. "Happy birthday, child," I said softly. She unwrapped it, lifted the necklace, and held it up to the light. For a brief moment, her expression faltered surprise, maybe even discomfort. Then she laughed lightly, passing it to a friend. "So vintage! My mother-in-law has such an eye for antiques." The room chuckled with her, the word antique ringing in my ears. I forced a smile. The table was already set, crowded with catered dishes again: sushi rolls, Italian pastas, French desserts. My eyes searched for even one dish from my kitchen, even one flavor of home. There was none. My son caught my gaze and quickly looked away. "Let's have a toast," someone shouted. My son lifted his glass. "To my wife, the brightest star tonight." His voice carried across the room, strong and proud. No mention of me, no glance in my direction. I sat at the edge of the table, my glass of water trembling slightly in my hand. The laughter washed over me, but it no longer stung alone, it chilled. I realized then that I was not just a guest in their home. I was an outsider, tolerated but not embraced. As the night wore on, I listened more than I spoke. Their conversations flowed around me, careless, confident. And then, like a knife slipped between ribs, her words cut through the noise. "Well," she said, her voice carrying easily, "soon we'll have to throw parties in a bigger place. That old house just isn't practical anymore." My breath caught. A friend leaned in, curious. "What old house?" She laughed, gesturing toward my son. "His childhood home. Lovely but outdated. We need something modern. Don't you agree?" My fingers tightened around the glass. I turned to my son. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw working, but still he said nothing. The room erupted in agreement: modern, practical, better for entertaining. I sat there, my heart pounding, the word outdated echoing in my mind. That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was the cradle of his childhood, the vault of my sacrifices, the last piece of my husband I still touched each day. And here, in a room full of strangers, it was reduced to an inconvenience. I wanted to speak, to defend it, to shout the truth of what that house carried. But my throat closed. I swallowed the words, letting them burn as they went down. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides a storm. The cake came out, candles flickering, laughter rising again. She leaned toward my son, whispering something I couldn't hear. He nodded, and together they blew out the candles as though they shared a secret flame. And in that moment, I realized this birthday wasn't just hers. It was a declaration, a stage set to show me where I stood. Not at the center, not even near the edge. I was already being pushed out. The necklace I had given her lay forgotten on the sideboard, untouched. The house I lived in had become their plan. And my son who once clung to my hand, remained silent. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, whispering inside myself, I must stay quiet. I must watch. Only then will I know what they are truly planning. But deep in my chest, the silence grew heavier, pressing against my ribs. I knew it wouldn't hold forever. It was meant to be a quiet Sunday lunch. At least, that's what my son told me when he called. Just family, Ma. Nothing big. His voice was soft, rehearsed, the kind of voice that hides something beneath its politeness. Still, I agreed. My heart had learned to cling to even the smallest invitations. I prepared a simple dessert that morning, sweet rice pudding with coconut cream, the dish he always begged for as a boy. I told myself, if I bring it, maybe he'll taste the past again, maybe he'll remember. When I arrived, I immediately knew it was no quiet gathering. The apartment was filled with voices, not just family, but her relatives, her friends. They filled the living room like a tide, their laughter spilling into the hallway. I clutched the bowl of pudding tighter, suddenly feeling foolish, as though I had brought a candle into a room already flooded with neon light. Ma, you're here, my son said, stepping forward quickly. He took the bowl from my hands, but instead of carrying it to the table, he slid it onto the sideboard near the door. Thank you, he murmured, avoiding my eyes. Her relatives greeted me politely, their smiles thin, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They looked around the apartment with approval, commenting on the decor, the furniture, the modern touch. She beamed at their praise, glowing like a hostess on a stage. Please, everyone, take your seats, she said brightly. She gestured toward the dining table, already crowded with catered dishes, shining trays of meats and cheeses, pastries dusted with sugar. My pudding sat forgotten by the door, its steam fading into nothing. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my place small and out of sight. The chatter rolled around me. Toasts were raised, glasses clinked, and then, as if planned, her father cleared his throat. We've been talking, he announced, his voice booming. It's time you two had a proper home, a house that reflects your success. She clasped my son's hand, her smile wide, triumphant. Yes, we've been considering our options. My chest tightened. I looked at my son, waiting for him to clarify, to soften the blow, to say that the house I lived in was not part of this conversation. But he stayed silent, his fingers tightening around hers. One of her relatives leaned forward. That childhood house of his, quaint, yes, but far too small, too old. Better to move on, sell it, start fresh. The words slammed into me. I felt the air leave my lungs. The table spun for a moment, their voices clanging like metal in my ears. That house, I whispered, more to myself than anyone, is not just walls. It is— She cut me off gently, her tone sweet but firm. Ma, don't take it personally. It's just practical. We need something modern, something that fits our lifestyle. Surely you understand. The room nodded in agreement. My son kept his eyes down, tracing the rim of his glass with his finger, as if the shape of it mattered more than my words. Heat rose to my face. My hands trembled in my lap. For days, weeks, I had held my tongue, swallowing each insult like bitter medicine. But now, here, surrounded by strangers in a place that wasn't even mine, the silence cracked. That house is your husband's inheritance, I said sharply, my voice louder than I intended. It is where he grew, where every sacrifice I made is carved into its walls. And now you speak of it like it is a burden to throw away? The room stilled. Forks paused in midair. Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered, tilting her head in pity. Oh, Ma, we only want what's best for the future. You can't hold on to the past forever. My son finally looked at me, His eyes glistened with something fear, guilt, but his lips moved with betrayal. Maybe she's right, Ma. Maybe it's time. The words hit me harder than any blow. I stared at him, the boy I had raised, the man who owed every step of his success to my sacrifices. His silence at the dinner had been a wound. But these words were the knife twisting inside me. The chatter resumed awkwardly, her relatives nodding, praising their wisdom. I sat frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear nothing else. My sweet rice pudding, the dish of his childhood, still sat untouched by the door, cooling into insignificance. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking hands. I looked around the table, at the faces smiling, at the man who once called me his anchor, at the woman who now claimed my house as hers. And I realized this was no longer just about food. It was about erasure. Piece by piece, they were stripping me away my cooking, my voice, my home. The mask had cracked. The storm I feared was no longer coming. It had arrived. The gathering ended with laughter and clinking glasses, but for me, it ended with silence that hollowed my chest. When I returned home that night, I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the untouched rice pudding still in its bowl, cold and heavy. I stirred it once with a spoon, then pushed it away. Even my own cooking could not comfort me now. For days, I moved like a shadow in my own house. Every corner whispered memories, his tiny hand tracing the pencil marks on the doorframe where I measured his height, his laughter echoing down the hallway. Now those same walls seemed to listen to whispers of a different kind, of being sold, replaced, erased. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that I noticed something unusual. The letterbox rattled, and I shuffled to the door to collect the mail. Among the usual envelopes' electric bills, advertisements was a letter addressed to my son, care of my address. My hands trembled as I turned it over. The seal bore the name of a bank. I shouldn't open it, I told myself. But my chest tightened with unease, the same unease I had felt at the dinner table when she spoke of a bigger place. My fingers betrayed me, tearing the envelope. Inside were documents, pre-approval papers for a mortgage, applications for transferring ownership. My name was listed, not as a signer, but as current occupant. My breath caught. The paper blurred as tears rose in my eyes. They had already begun. Plans were not being discussed. They were being executed. I folded the papers back, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the envelope again. My heart hammered in my ears. My son's silence had been more than weakness, it had been complicity. That evening, when he stopped by to check in, I noticed his nervousness. He avoided my gaze, setting his briefcase by the door as though it might shield him. She didn't come with him, which only sharpened my suspicion. "How are you, Ma?" he asked, glancing around the room as though seeing it not as a home but as a property. I steadied my voice. "Fine." I paused, then added, "The house is old, yes, but its walls are strong." He nodded distractedly. "Yes, but times change. Maybe it's better for you to live somewhere easier, smaller. We could arrange something." Arrange something. The phrase chilled me. Arrangements were made for the dead, for those who no longer had choices. I stared at him, my son, the child I had raised with blood and sweat. I wanted to ask him if he remembered the nights I starved so he could eat, if he remembered the mornings I sewed until my fingers bled just so he could have books for school. Instead, I said quietly, "Who is arranging this, you or her?" His shoulders tensed, his lips pressed together. He didn't answer. That silence was enough. I let the moment pass, hiding my trembling hands beneath the table. I knew then I needed to be patient, to listen, to watch. Over the next week, I began to notice small things. She stopped by more often, walking through the rooms as if inspecting them. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor. Her perfume clung to the air long after she left. Once I caught her opening cupboards, running her fingers along the shelves as though cataloging what would stay and what would go. When she saw me, she smiled. "Just checking the space, Ma. Thinking of renovations." Renovations. Another word heavy with threat. One night when I couldn't sleep, I walked quietly past my son's study. The door was ajar. Inside, he sat with her, papers spread across the desk, their heads bent together. I heard fragments, transfer, signature, faster this way. My breath caught. I backed away before they saw me, retreating into the darkness of my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, my pulse racing, the truth finally pressing against me. They weren't just planning. They were moving forward, step by step, using silence and politeness as their weapons. I pressed my palms together, whispering into the night. So this is what love has become. A house, a paper, a transaction. The next morning, when I poured tea at the kitchen table, I smiled faintly as if nothing was wrong. I listened to their voices in the hallway, her bright and sharp, his soft and uncertain. My silence became my shield. But inside me, the unease hardened into something else. Resolve. If they wanted to erase me, I would not vanish quietly. I would watch. I would wait. And when the moment came, I would make them see what they had done. As I cleared the teacups, one thought seared into my chest. They are planning to take everything from me, and the son I sacrificed for has already chosen her side. The days blurred together, each one heavy with the weight of what I now knew. I moved through the house quietly, like a ghost haunting her own life. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator seemed to remind me, they are preparing to take this from you. I told myself I needed proof, something undeniable, because a mother's heart always wants to believe her child will return, that love will outweigh betrayal, but my eyes had already seen too much. One afternoon, when the sun lay heavy on the curtains and the cicadas screamed in the trees, they arrived unexpectedly. My son carried a folder tucked beneath his arm, and she, as always, carried her smile that never reached her eyes. "Ma, we need to discuss some papers," he said carefully, as though rehearsing the line. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. "What papers?" She slid into the chair beside him, her perfume swallowing the air. From the folder, she drew out a stack neatly clipped, thick with signatures and blanks waiting to be filled. I glimpsed the words before she could turn them away. Deed, transfer, occupant. "It's just a formality," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "You'll be more comfortable in a smaller place. A retirement community, perhaps. Everything will be easier for you." Her words coiled around me like a snake. Retirement community, the polite phrase for exile. I looked at my son. His eyes shifted from mine to the papers to hers back again. His lips parted, but the words tangled in his throat. "You want me to sign?" I said flatly. "Just to make things smoother," he murmured. The silence between us swelled. I could hear the clock ticking, each second hammering against my ribs. I placed the cup down carefully, the porcelain clinking against the table. My hands did not tremble this time. "Your father built this house with his hands. I carried you through winters in these rooms, fed you from this kitchen, nursed you through fevers in that bedroom. And you want me to sign it away?" He flinched, the boy inside him flickering for a moment, but she leaned forward, her nails tapping lightly on the paper. "Sentiment is beautiful, Ma, but it doesn't pay the bills. Think about your future. Think about his career. This house is wasted potential." Wasted potential. The phrase burned hotter than any insult before. I swallowed hard, pressing my palms against the table to steady myself. "I will not sign." Her smile froze. My son shifted uncomfortably, his chair scraping against the floor. "Ma, please," he whispered. "Don't make this harder." Harder, as if I were the obstacle, not the mother who had given everything. They left shortly after, the folder clutched tightly in her hands, her heels striking the floor with irritation. He didn't look back when he closed the door. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. The candle on the table burned low, its wax pooling silently. I thought of all the sacrifices etched into these walls, the earrings I sold for his books, the nights I stayed awake stitching clothes, the meals I skipped so he could eat. All of it had led to this. Papers demanding my signature, my son unable to defend me. But the world has a way of revealing what is hidden. A few days later, when she came alone claiming she had forgotten a scarf, she dropped her phone on the table while reaching for her purse. It lit up with a message before she could snatch it back. "Just a glimpse, but enough. Once the deed is signed, we can move quickly. Don't delay." The name attached was not a friend, not a relative. It was a realtor. I looked at her then, and for the first time, I let my silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. She smiled tightly, grabbed the phone, and left without another word. I sat down slowly, my breath unsteady. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was here, written in digital letters, whispered in papers, etched in their hurried glances. They were preparing to sell not just my house, but my life. And my son, the boy, who once clung to my hand in fear, was walking with her every step of the way. As I stared at the empty doorway, a thought, sharp and cold, pressed against my heart. If love can be erased by ink and paper, then what do I have left to hold on to? The signs had always been there, scattered like crumbs across my days. Her disdain for my cooking, his silence at the table, their whispers behind closed doors. But now, after seeing the message on her phone, after touching the sharp edge of those papers with my own hands, everything began to connect. I started to listen differently. Not to the words they said, but to the spaces between them. When my son called, his tone was softer than usual, but his pauses were longer. "Ma, are you comfortable?" he asked once, his voice breaking on the last word. It wasn't a question about my health or my peace of mind. It was a test. Was I ready to be moved? When she visited, her eyes roamed the house as if taking inventory. "This place must be hard to maintain at your age," she remarked, her fingers brushing across the mantel where my husband's photo Saturday. "Wouldn't it be easier to live somewhere with less responsibility?" Her smile was sweet, but her gaze lingered on the frame like she was already measuring where to hang her own pictures. I began to piece the puzzle together. The mortgage papers with my name listed as current occupant. Her casual remarks about renovations. His silence whenever the house was mentioned. A silence that was not ignorance but agreement. The message from the realtor: "Once the deed is signed, we can move quickly." It was no longer suspicion. It was a plan, sharpened and ready. One evening, I overheard them in the hallway outside the study. Their voices were low, but the walls carried every syllable. "She won't agree easily," my son said, his tone weary. "She doesn't have to agree," she replied smoothly. "All she has to do is sign. And if she doesn't, well, there are ways." I froze where I stood, my heart pounding in my ears. Ways. The word twisted in my stomach. My mind traveled back through the weeks. The way she had dismissed my dishes, the way he had looked at the floor instead of me, the way her father had spoken so confidently about a bigger place. They weren't waiting for my approval. They were waiting for my surrender. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the windows. I saw the pencil marks on the doorframe where I had measured his height year after year, each line a promise that he was growing stronger. I touched the cracked tile in the kitchen where I had dropped a pot the year his father died, too shaken by grief to care about fixing it. I ran my fingers along the banister where his small hands had once clutched as he raced upstairs. This house was more than bricks and wood. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was me. And they wanted to erase it with a pen. The puzzle was complete now. She was the architect, pushing piece by piece into place. He was her silent accomplice, unwilling or unable to defy her. Together, they had built a future where I did not exist, not as a mother, not as a woman, not even as a shadow in these rooms. But I was not ready to vanish. The next morning, when they arrived again, papers in hand, I greeted them with calm I did not feel. I poured tea into 3 cups, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "Ma, please, just look them over," he said gently, sliding the papers toward me. I did not touch them. I let the silence stretch, heavy and thick. Finally, I spoke. "Do you know what this house cost me?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "Ma, we're not—" "It cost me my earrings," I interrupted. "The only pair your father ever gave me. I sold them to buy you school books. It cost me my health, my youth, every meal I skipped so you would never go hungry. It cost me my dreams, because I poured them all into you." His face crumpled slightly, but she placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. "That's touching, Ma," she said softly. "But times change. Sacrifices of the past don't guarantee comfort in the future." The words pierced deeper than I expected. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them with resolve. "I will not sign," I said firmly. The silence that followed was sharp. Her smile faltered, and for the first time I saw a flicker of frustration break through her polished mask. My son's shoulders slumped, his gaze darting to the papers, then to me. The puzzle was clear now, and though the pieces cut me, I understood the picture they had been building all along, a life without me in it. As I cleared the cups, I whispered inside myself, if they want a battle, they will find I am not as weak as they think. But in the deepest corner of my heart, another voice trembled. When your own child chooses silence, how long can a mother's strength hold? It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the sunlight slanted lazily through the curtains, turning dust into glitter. I had been shelling peas at the kitchen table, my thoughts drifting, when I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. They entered without knocking, my son and his wife carrying folders and voices too hushed for comfort. I stayed still, my hands moving automatically, though my ears sharpened like a blade. They sat in the living room, papers spread across the coffee table. I caught fragments as I moved quietly down the hallway. The buyer wants confirmation. Once her signature is there, it's done. We'll tell her it's for her good. My chest tightened. The buyer. Not plans, not discussions. A buyer. I stepped into the room before they noticed, my hands wiping slowly on my apron. A buyer? I asked, my voice calm but iron beneath. They froze. Her lips parted first. Ma, you startled us, she said with a nervous laugh, quickly regaining her polished tone. We were only exploring options. I looked at my son. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the papers as though they might swallow him whole. Options? I repeated. You mean selling the only home your father and I ever built? Ma? His voice cracked. It's just, the house is old. It's too much for you. We thought. You thought? My words cut sharper than I intended. Or she thought. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming cold. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. What matters is the future. This house is valuable, but not if it's tied up in memories. We can use it for something better for us, for him. She gestured toward my son, her hand claiming him like a possession. My knees felt weak, but I stood straighter. And where do I fit in this future? Her answer was soft, almost pitying. You'll be cared for. You won't have to worry about anything. A quiet community, nurses to help. Isn't that what you want? I stared at her, at the words sugar-coated to sound like kindness, but which tasted of exile. My eyes turned to my son again. Is this true? You would send me away from the very walls that raised you? His lips trembled, his jaw clenched. For a moment, I saw the boy he had been, the boy who once defended me against playground bullies, the boy who cried when I was ill, but then he lowered his head. It's for the best, Ma, he whispered. The room spun. My hands gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. For the best. The phrase echoed like a curse. The papers lay open on the table, the words stark and undeniable. Deed, transfer, sale contract, current occupant. My name reduced to a legal inconvenience. I reached forward, my fingers brushing the edge of the document. Memories surged with the touch measuring his height against the doorframe, patching the roof with my husband in the summer heat, cooking endless meals in the tiny kitchen. All of it written away in ink. No, I said firmly, my voice steady though my heart raced. I will not sign. Her eyes hardened, the mask slipping at last. You can't hold on forever. We're already in talks. The buyer is waiting. If you don't cooperate, it will only make things more difficult for everyone. I met her gaze, unflinching. Difficult for you, perhaps, but not for me. This is my home. It is the only place left that still remembers who I am. For the first time, she had no ready smile, no polished remark. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes sharp. She turned to my son. Say something, she urged. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in months. His eyes were wet, his face pale, but his silence said everything. The truth sat at the table with us that day, not in whispers, not in suspicions, but in papers and silence and betrayal. I pushed the folder away. If you want this house, I said slowly, you'll have to take it from me without my consent. And when you do, remember, every brick, every floorboard, every memory will haunt you. You may own it on paper, but you will never belong to it. My son's shoulders sagged. He covered his face with his hands. She clenched the folder, her knuckles white, her breath sharp. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout, and in that silence, I knew. The battle had shifted. The masks were gone. The truth was out. The war for this house, my life, had truly begun. The days after that confrontation stretched like a wire pulled too tight, every word, every glance ready to snap. My son avoided visiting alone, and when he came, she was always beside him, her polished smile masking sharper intentions. I kept my silence, but inside me unease gnawed like a rat in the walls. One morning, the doorbell rang. A courier handed me an envelope, thick and official, bearing the logo of a law firm I had never heard of. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside were documents confirming a pending transfer of ownership for my house. At the bottom of one page, I froze. There was my name, my signature. I dropped the papers as though they had burned me. My breath caught in my chest. I had never signed anything, not once. My hands shook as I picked them up again, staring at the loops and strokes of the writing. It looked like mine, careful, slanted, aged with a tremor, but I knew these lines were not written by me. A chill swept over me. If the papers already bore my signature, then the battle wasn't just about convincing me anymore. It was about erasing me from the process altogether. That evening, I confronted my son. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes avoiding mine. She lingered behind him, her arms folded, her smile thin. "I received papers today," I said, holding up the envelope. "It seems I've already agreed to give up my home. Tell me, when did I sign this?" His eyes widened briefly before darting to her. She stepped forward smoothly, her tone calm. "It's a misunderstanding, Ma. Sometimes paperwork gets processed ahead of time. Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" My voice cracked, rising despite my effort to steady it. "My name is on these papers, my signature. Do you think I don't know my own hand?" He swallowed hard. "Ma, please." "Did you forge it?" I demanded, my gaze piercing him. "Or did you allow her to?" His shoulders slumped. He pressed a hand to his forehead, but he didn't deny it. His silence was louder than any confession. Tears pricked my eyes, but anger steadied my voice. "I sacrificed my life for you. I gave up everything, piece by piece, so you could stand tall. And now you would erase me with a stroke of a pen?" "Ma, it's not like that," he whispered, his voice broken. We need the house. It's the only way forward. I didn't want it to be like this." Her hand tightened on his arm. "Enough," she said sharply. Then to me with false sweetness, "Don't dramatize this, Mother. It's business. You'll be taken care of." "Taken care of," I repeated bitterly. Like a burden, like a bill to be paid. The words spilled out of me, years of sacrifice condensed into fury. "I sold my only earrings for your books. I skipped meals so you could eat. I worked my fingers raw so you could have a future. And this is how you repay me? By stealing the roof over my head?" His eyes brimmed with tears, but his lips remained sealed. He let her speak for him, as always. She straightened, adjusting the folder under her arm. "You can fight, but it won't matter. The process has already started. Soon enough, this will be ours. The papers say so." I stared at her, at the cold certainty in her eyes, and something inside me hardened. They thought my age made me weak. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought a forged signature could erase me. But I knew the truth now, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. That night, I sat in the kitchen, the documents spread before me. The candlelight trembled over the ink, over the lines that mimicked my hand. My chest ached, but my resolve burned steady. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I whispered to the empty house, to the walls that had carried my life. If they want this battle, they will learn what it means to fight a mother who has nothing left to lose. I had never been one to raise my voice. All my life I believed patience was a mother's greatest weapon, that love could outlast betrayal, that silence could heal wounds. But the day came when silence no longer protected me. They arrived again, late in the evening, carrying the folder I now dreaded. She walked in first, her heels striking the floor with confidence, her smile thin and sharp. My son followed, his shoulders hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. "Ma," he began softly, "we need to finalize things. The buyer is waiting." The buyer. Always the buyer, as though money mattered more than memory, more than blood. I sat at the head of the table, the same table where I had once served him soup on winter nights. where I had taught him to write his name, where I had whispered stories until his eyes closed in sleep. The folder lay between us now, replacing food, replacing warmth. She opened it briskly, sliding the papers toward me. It's already in motion. The only thing missing is your cooperation. Something inside me snapped. I rose slowly, my knees stiff but my back straight. My voice, when it came, was steady, sharper than I had ever let it be. Enough. The words startled even me. It startled him too, his head jerked up, eyes wide. She raised her brows but said nothing. You think this house is just wood and stone, I said, my voice trembling with power I hadn't felt in years. But every brick was laid with sacrifice. Every corner holds a piece of my life. This kitchen fed you when I had nothing left for myself. These walls sheltered you when storms raged outside. And now you would erase it all with ink? He shifted uncomfortably. Ma, we just want… No, I could in, my voice rising. You want comfort. You want convenience. But you forget this house was never built on convenience. It was built on struggle, on love, on the kind of sacrifices you cannot even begin to understand. His eyes glistened, but his lips stayed shut. I turned to her, my gaze unflinching. And you speak of future as if it erases the past. You look at these walls and see only profit. But I see nights without sleep, days without food, years without joy, all so he could stand where he stands now. And you dare call it wasted potential? For the first time her mask cracked, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing with something colder than anger, fear, perhaps, or contempt at being exposed. I placed my hands firmly on the table, leaning forward. Listen carefully. I will not sign. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. If you want this house, you will have to take it from my cold hands. And even then, it will never be yours. The walls will remember me. The floors will remember my footsteps. And so will he. My son's face crumpled. Tears gathered in his eyes, but he did not speak. He reached for the papers, then stopped, his hand trembling in the air before falling uselessly back to his lap. The room was silent except for the clock ticking steadily on the wall. Each tick felt like a hammer driving the truth deeper. I was not leaving. Finally, she gathered the papers with a sharp flick, her movements clipped. You're being unreasonable, she said coldly. This isn't strength, it's stubbornness. And it will only make things worse for you. Perhaps, I said softly. But stubbornness is all I have left. And sometimes stubbornness is the last language of love. My son lowered his face into his hands, shoulders shaking. She stood tall, her fury hidden behind a brittle smile. I sat back down, my breath heavy, my body trembling from the force of my own words. But in my chest, a strange calm settled. For the first time in months, I had spoken, truly spoken. The battle was not over, I knew that. The forged papers still existed. The buyer still waited. Their plans still moved forward like a storm. But tonight, for one brief moment, I had reclaimed my voice. And I wondered, as I stared at the flickering candle on the table, would that voice be enough to protect what love and sacrifice had built? Or was I already fighting a war I could not win? After that night, the house no longer felt the same. It still stood walls steady, roof unbroken, but its air carried the weight of words that could not be taken back. My defiance had been clear, my refusal firm, yet the silence that followed pressed against me like an unwelcome guest who would not leave. My son visited less often. When he did come, he rarely came alone. She was always there, her presence like a shadow stretching across every corner of my home. They no longer asked me to cook, no longer asked me to sit with them. Instead, they brought food in boxes, placing them on my table as if to remind me that tradition had already been replaced. I noticed the way he looked at me now, eyes heavy with guilt, but lips pressed closed. He wanted to speak, I could feel it. But each time she would touch his arm, lean close, whisper something, and the words would die in his throat. The house grew colder, not because of the weather, but because of the distance. The laughter that once filled these rooms, his boyish chatter, the echoes of childhood games, all of it had been replaced by whispers of contracts and property, by footsteps that sounded foreign on my wooden floors. One afternoon I found a notice slipped under my door. It was from the bank, addressed to him, but sent to this address. My hands trembled as I read the bold letters. Loan approval pending property transfer. I folded the paper carefully, my chest tightening. It confirmed what I already knew: the storm was advancing, and I was standing alone against it. That night I set the table for myself. Just one bowl, one pair of chopsticks. I cooked a simple meal: rice, soup, pickled vegetables. The flavors filled the kitchen, but instead of comfort, they carried sorrow. Each bite tasted like memory, heavy and bitter. I thought of my husband, how he had worked these fields, hammered these nails, patched this roof with his bare hands. I thought of the promise I had made to him at his deathbed. I will keep this house. I will protect what we built. Now that promise weighed like a stone on my chest. The next weekend, they arrived again. She spoke first, her tone clipped but polite. "Ma, we're only trying to help. You can't live alone forever. You'll be safer in a community with others your age." Safer. The word dripped with insult, as though this home, the one that had sheltered me through storms, sickness, and grief, was now a danger. I looked at my son. "Do you believe this?" I asked quietly. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked at her, then at the floor. The silence screamed louder than betrayal. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "If you sell this house," I said softly, "you sell me with it. Is that what you want?" He flinched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who cried when he lost his toy, who promised never to leave me. But then he closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the boy was gone. She placed her hand on his arm, steadying him like reins on a horse. "It's already decided," she said firmly. The words sliced through me. I stood slowly, my knees aching but my voice strong. "Then know this: if you erase me from this house, you will erase me from your life. And that is a loss no money will repair." For the first time, silence fell not on me but on them. Her lips tightened, his shoulders slumped, the air thick with tension. They left shortly after, their footsteps sharp against the floor, the door closing with a sound that echoed like finality. I sank into my chair, the house quiet once more. My chest ached, my breath shallow. The candle on the table flickered, its flame bending low. I whispered into the silence, "I will not leave. Even if the walls fall, even if my heart breaks, I will not leave." But deep inside, I knew the battle had already taken its toll. The warmth between us had been replaced by suspicion, by contracts, by silence that cut deeper than any words. The house still stood, but love, the love I thought indestructible, was crumbling brick by brick. The house is quiet now, quieter than ever. Some nights I walk through it as if it were a museum, each room holding echoes of a life that feels farther away with every passing day. I touch the walls, the photographs, the pencil marks on the doorframe. They remember me, even if my own son does not. Weeks have passed since their last visit. I do not know if their silence is a retreat or a strategy. But in the stillness, I have begun to wonder, is the battle already lost? Or am I still standing guard over something that no one else values anymore? Yesterday, another letter arrived. This one bore no return address. Inside was a notice stamped in red, "Final review pending." I read the words again and again until they blurred. My name was still there, listed as occupant. But beside it, in bold, was a phrase that made my heart pound. Authorization received. Authorization. From whom? From when? My hands shook as I held the paper, my breath shallow. Did they already forge another signature? Did my son press the pen himself, convincing himself it was for the best? I pressed the paper against my chest, feeling its coldness seep into me. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He stood at the gate of the house, his hands rough with years of labor, his face weary but kind. He didn't speak. He only looked at me, then at the house, and finally back at me, as if asking, "Will you let it go, or will you stay until the end?" I woke with tears on my cheeks. This morning, I boiled rice for myself, the steam fogging the window. The street outside was alive with children's laughter, the same laughter that once filled this house. I closed my eyes, listening, and for a moment I could almost hear my son's voice among them, young and innocent, before ambition and silence took him away from me. I don't know what will happen next. Perhaps the papers will come again, this time final and undeniable. Perhaps they will arrive at my door with movers, boxes ready, polite words hiding sharp edges. Perhaps my son will stand beside her, unable to meet my eyes, while strangers strip the rooms bare. Or perhaps he will remember. Perhaps one morning he will walk through this door alone, sit at this table, and ask me to cook the soup that once warmed him to his toes. Perhaps he will break his silence and choose me, even if too late. I cannot know. What I do know is this: love, once given, cannot be reclaimed. It clings to walls, to floors, to air itself. Even if they take this house, even if they sign away every brick, my love will remain here. It will seep into the wood, the soil, the foundation. Whoever lives here after me will feel it, though they may not understand it. And my son, no matter how far he goes, no matter what he chooses, will never escape the memory of the mother who once sold her earrings so he could learn, who once poured her soul into meals he now calls old-fashioned. The house is quiet tonight, but it is not empty. It holds me still. It holds everything. I sit at the table with a single candle burning low, the flame bending as though listening, and I whisper, to the house, to the night, to whoever may hear. If they take you from me, remember me well, and if he forgets, remind him. The flame flickers once, then steadies, and I wonder when the time comes, will I still be here to guard it, or will I already be just another memory these walls refuse to let go?